to attempt to share my slides and see if I can do that successfully. Be patient with me. Are the slides up? I only have one screen here. Can somebody tell me if the slides are up?
Yeah, I'm not seeing.
No slides yet.
No slides, thank you. This and do slide share screen. And this. And this. And then I'm actually going to turn off my video just temporarily. And then this. How about that?
Yep.
Great.
I'm seeing them.
All right, great. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it this morning. And you know, as we get rolling, we're a small group, and I know a lot of you have been through strategic planning, and you've done this yourself, and I welcome your input. As we go through this, you know, don't feel like you'd be interrupting me. Just jump right in. If you want to comment, if you want to question, if you want to say something you've done that works, that's fine with me. You won't be interrupting me a lot. I actually welcome your input. So just briefly, as we get started, background on me is, of course, I'm with BKD, and I'm with our Springfield office, and that's actually where our corporate headquarters is. And I know some of you know Nick, and you know the BKD offices up in Des Moines, and we do have offices across the U.S. from Salt Lake City to New York City. And so I'm not a CPA. My background is actually kind of divided into two worlds. It's nonprofit and higher ed. And I've worked in a lot of different kinds of nonprofits. Mostly that's been in the area of either poverty or child abuse and neglect, which also touches into domestic violence and things like that. And then many years ago, I stole an idea from Georgetown University and brought it down to Springfield, and started a center to teach people how to be nonprofit leaders, how to do everything from grant writing to fundraising, to be better on financial analysis and things like that. And did that and led that center for many years and taught there. And also we launched a master's program called the Masters of Nonprofit and Civic Leadership, and still have that master's today. In fact, it's one of the fastest growing masters at the university. So a few years ago, it's actually been about 3 years ago, some of the boards that I had trained had some partners from BKD, and they approached me with the idea of maybe working with them to train their nonprofits and work with nonprofits where their footprint was. So I did and joined them, and actually it's been a great experience, and I have the privilege of working with a lot of organizations. And back in the old days, we call it BC, before COVID, I've traveled quite a bit and usually train anywhere from 40 to 50 or 60 boards a year, and do, you know, strategic planning, do different types of things, board trainings and things like that. And I do also still sit on boards myself, and you can see some of those logos up there. We have a crisis nursery in Springfield. I'm on the board of the YMCA. And a poverty organization called Elevate Lives. I sit on their board. And if you use LinkedIn or Twitter, there's my info, and I'd be happy to have you join me. I only post things about nonprofit industry, or, you know, things that are relevant to the industry. I don't really do any other personal stuff. I don't use it for any of that. So in this session this morning, we'll talk a little bit about, you know, the study and kind of where the nonprofit sector is. We'll talk about some rationale for planning and timing on that. I'm going to do like a brief overview of what I think the process of planning is. And I do that sort of just to set it up to also talk about long-term versus short-term planning. So I mentioned the survey, and that we had done more than 300 nonprofits. And again, Trish said that she would share that with you, and that's great. You know, we covered 4 areas: finances, program services, operations, and governance. and literally just released this yesterday. So I'd like to mention just a couple of the findings. And again, I'm doing that just to set the stage for the need for planning and the need to be responsive. So this is, we used electronic surveys, we distributed it there, and you can see now that's the sort of the geographic scope of the respondents, sort of divided into 7 areas. And interestingly, it came out pretty even. A nice distribution. We feel like that's a pretty good snapshot of the sector. And that's the percentages of people who responded and where they are. Here's just a few of the findings, the key findings. Due to health restrictions and government guidelines, almost 90% of the organizations have had to make adjustments and alter the way they provide their programs and services. 70% have experienced a decrease in their net income. And as you would guess, more than half have taken a big hit with losses in revenue from a decline in fees for programs and services. And almost 1/3 have had to cut or plan to cut some of their current programs to stabilize their organizations. We wondered how organizations were feeling right now. So we're about 10, 11 months now into the pandemic, and it's been a long, rough road. And you can see about half of the organizations are very concerned or somewhat concerned about their current financial. And more than 1/3 of them are pleased. And then there's a group that just doesn't quite know how to feel. And, you know, in a sense, I think we're all there. But this is a snapshot of organizations across the country. Some are happy, some aren't right now. You know, the truth, though, is a lot of organizations did okay during the past year because of relief funding. They did okay because there was a rise in generosity, but there's a concern about 2021. You know, are people going to become numb to the pandemic and less sensitive to nonprofits and the work they're doing? And what about the funding from the federal government and state? Is that going to be gone? So I think there's a concern with a lot of nonprofits right now. And this is just a snapshot of the revenue. And, you know, the decline is pretty alarming. More than 70% of the organizations have lost revenue over the past 10, 11 months. About 1/4 are down about half, and about 1/10 are down more than half. So now, interestingly, though, some are up or some have no change. And the reason, again, is varied, but part of that could be because of funding from the CARES Act. And then what are the biggest challenges right now? Well, as you can see, most of that's going to be either around the finances or the resources, just being able to continue doing the work. So I think that leads us to the question, is now a good time to do planning? Is now a good time to do strategic planning during the pandemic? We did ask organizations that in our study, and you can see here that about 1/3 are doing it now or have done it in the past year, and another 1/3 are planning on doing it. And then 31% said they have not, and they don't expect that they will be doing it in the next year. So, you know, we don't have the luxury of developing plans, at least now, that may come to fruition in, say, 3 to 5 years. But having a strategic plan during the crisis can actually help you prioritize your resources, and it can provide clarity in decision making. But let me just throw out a caution here. Don't let uncertainty translate into fear. Now, I don't expect you to be reckless, but you also don't want to stop making important decisions about the future. And then, you know, in a typical environment, here would be some reasons to do a plan. Have you had a big restructure of your organization? Do you see some opportunities on the horizon that don't fit your current model? Have you recently merged or formed a new partnership with another organization? Or have you had a succession plan or a transition with your top leadership? Or quite simply, are you operating without a clear path right now? And I think that's true for a lot of organizations. So back to the question, is now a good time? And I actually have to say yes. This is a great time to communicate clarity to your donors and to the broader community. This is a great time to let them know how the pandemic has impacted the community you're in, the people you serve, and how it's impacted your organization and your ability to serve them. And this is a perfect time to be clear about how you are making important adjustments and how you're positioning your organization right now so it remains strong and effective. You know, right now I'm actually leading several sessions for different nonprofits across the country, from one in New York, one in Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. I've got one in Omaha, a couple in Kansas City. And some of the bigger ones, when we first started working with them, I asked the CEOs, are you sure you want to do planning now? Does it make sense? And all of them said, yes, this is the perfect time to do this. All right, so maybe right now, this is a good time to use an analogy to explain the process. So this is a ladder. And a ladder is a tool for reaching a destination that may not be within your reach. So climbing the ladder requires one step at a time. In the same manner, a nonprofit organization may be busy like you're busy. You may be climbing a ladder without taking the time to agree on a strategy for the future. But you know, the truth is busyness is meaningless if when you reach the top of the ladder, you figure out that your ladder is in the wrong place. So yeah, this is an important time, and I would say it's a good time. Now, I think that planning can be broken down pretty simply and pretty easily. This is really what it's all about. Just taking time to clearly define who you are, and not just who you think you are, but who other people say you are. And then next, where are you? Meaning your current health. And where are you in light of the marketplace and competition, and in light of the environment where you operate? And then we shift to the future. Where do you want to go? In other words, what is the vision? Once you've decided on a target for the future, you're ready to start that written list of actions and to reach your goal. And finally, you need some type of benchmark to know if you actually accomplished what you hoped you would accomplish. Now, I'm sure that many of you have done the strategic plan before. And if we were together, I'd ask you for a show of hands, and I'd guess that most of you have done this. And then I would ask the next question, how did you like it? Or how did that go? And the truth is, most people really don't like strategic planning. They have a negative experience about it. And I think the biggest reason is that they feel it was a waste of time. They spent a lot of money and time that was devoted to the plan, and then they finished it and it was put on a shelf and it gathered dust. And so I hear you. I've actually had those experiences myself, and I know it can be pretty frustrating. But if you had to use one word to describe the logic or the rationale behind doing your plan, it's clarity. Clarity for you, clarity for your leadership team, clarity for your board, clarity for your donors, clarity for the people who use your services. And the truth is, if you don't have clarity, you're the closest insiders to the work, you can be sure the people further out have less clarity than you do. And in working with organizations, I find sometimes board members aren't even really super clear about what they do or the work that they do. So it's like throwing a rock in a pond. At first the ripple is bigger and stronger, but the further it goes out, the weaker it is. So clarity is the key. Now, this is the traditional process, and I refer to this as guided discovery. Again, who you are and who you are, what others say you are, and all that really matters. But one of the things is we're going to work through the priorities, but we're going to start out actually with the mission, vision, and values. And I really think that that's the most important place. And then, we're going to go down there from priorities to goals to tactics and so on, and through that process. But I wanted to briefly mention this because I find a lot of organizations kind of skip over this, and not so much on their mission, but on their vision. And I don't quite understand why. So again, why should you do the planning process? And I really think that everything we do as nonprofits, the first question we should ask or be able to answer is why? Why are you doing this? I mean, you're busy. You don't have a lot of money. Why are you doing this? And I think that that's a good place to begin answering this question, even now, to say, should you be doing this? And several reasons that I think planning adds great value. But first and most important, that if you do a plan well, it's going to give you that laser focus. And honestly, it's going to help you have better outcomes. So if for no other reason you do it, the reason you should do it is because it's going to help you serve people or the issue or cause you do and be better at it. It's going to make you more efficient and have better outcomes. And then, of course, like we mentioned, you know, it's a great way not only to bring clarity, but it can also bring your staff and your board and your donors and the community all on the same page. One of the plans I'm doing right now is for a hospital in Pittsburgh. And, you know, they have board members that are prominent community members. And honestly, and I'm doing interviews with them individually, Zoom interviews. And I find that even though these are sometimes they're doctors or they're prominent people in the community, they aren't necessarily clear about the work of the organization. And as we talk through this process and we show them, you know, this pyramid that I'm showing here, it really kind of puts them on the same page, which is interesting that they weren't before. And just real briefly, I always have to, or I feel the need to explain the difference in plans because I talk to people and they want me to do a plan, but what they really want is an operational plan. So I think it's good to understand the difference. So really the strategic plan is more about the why things need to happen. You know, the mission, vision, value, getting everybody involved in the process, painting that picture of the future. That's more about the strategic plan. It's the broader. The operational is more about the how. And I think this sits a little bit lower on the totem pole, but these are plans that are going to be, typically you take that broader strategic plan and you put it into the hands of your executive team, your leadership, and maybe some mid-level managers, and you let them populate that plan. They're the ones who can help decide how to carry out that, how to execute the plan. And really, they have to be involved in that. If they're not, they're unlikely to buy in. And then, you know, honestly, as a board member, I can tell you, I don't know the best way a lot of times how to execute that plan. And then a business plan is the focus on the actions, generally going to be more about the revenue and the income for the programs. And then the contingency plan is developed with the idea of unexpected events or risks. And actually, we're going to talk a little more about strategic or contingency plans coming up. You know, the truth is, and I get this, your time is precious. And as a leader and as a board member, every minute counts. But the reality is this, not everything that you do is equal. And so you really have to take time to deliberate and be thoughtful in the planning that you're doing. And these decisions, I'm a big believer in interconnectedness. So I think what you do today is not only impacting this week and next month and this quarter, it has a ripple effect that could last for decades, for, you know. So this isn't just about you and your board, it's about the people you're serving. And a good decision that you make today could lead to a healthier person or a healthier family who are better able to live in a way that affects maybe their children, their grandchildren, and neighbors, and entire communities. So I think you see my point that the time spent you make in doing planning today really could have a ripple effect for years. Successful planning also, I think, can really challenge thinking. And this goes for long range and short range. I think, though, a lot of the groups that I work with, they're comfortable where they are and what they're doing, and they're very risk averse. They're very averse to changing. And if they discover changes are needed, they're uncomfortable. And it's a bit scary, you know, when you talk about change. The new ways of approaching a problem or new ways of going about the work can really take the organization to a new place. So I think the starting point for every strategic plan, whether short-term, scenario planning, contingency planning, you absolutely have to have buy-in from the top. And what I mean by that is this is a hands-on approach. You know, it can't be you just hire a facilitator and have them do it, populate the plan and then just pass it on. It really has to be a commitment from the top to do the whole thing. The time involved, the engagement involved, the board, the staff, It really takes that commitment. Without that commitment, there's just no way it's going to work. So you've probably talked about integrated planning or heard about integrated planning. The strategic plan is really connected to the bigger picture. And, you know, it has to be key, but in truth, it doesn't stand alone from all these other aspects of your organization. So, you know, integrated planning at its core really includes strategic planning, but it's not just long-term, it's short-term, it's program planning, it's business planning, it has all these aspects of your organization. And not in the development of it, nor in the execution of the plan, but if it's not integrated, it actually works in opposition to the other aspects. So for that reason, I really discourage organizations from rushing through the project or the planning process as quickly as they can just to say they did it. I mean, really, it has to be a thoughtful approach. So I break it down into two kinds of planning, or at least two approaches to planning. One, I think, is what I would call the contextual approach. So the first one, this is for organizations that, you know, everything's really running smoothly and really there's nothing major going on. At least it appears there isn't. They're stable. There's no major concerns right now. So why, you might ask, would an organization do planning? And I mean, that's a good question. I think you do planning maybe at this point just to check in, to make sure you're on track, to make sure you're hitting your marks, to make sure you're not missing something, that you haven't started veering away from your core purpose or your reason for existence. And this is good for organizations that are stable, but maybe they just need to tweak their programs a little bit, or maybe they're going through some growing pains, or maybe you've evolved from on the lifeline of organizations. Maybe you've evolved from infancy to that toddler stage, and maybe you need some deeper capacity, or maybe you have focused too much on activities and now you need to focus on measuring your impact or your outcome. So, I mean, that's good, and that's an okay process. The other one is what I would call the revolutionary approach. And this says, man, we need some major changes right now. So this doesn't mean your board and staff have made mistakes. You may discover your programs aren't relevant, or because of changes in the world, you know, like the pandemic, or maybe there are changes in the people you serve, or in the economy, or with technology, or you just need a major overhaul. But this approach is good if you recently, let's say maybe you had a merger, or you formed a new alliance or strategic partnership with an organization, or maybe you had a catastrophic event, or maybe your reputation was greatly damaged or something like that. So there are organizations that fall somewhere in between the contextual and the revolutionary approach. They're doing okay, but they need to consider changes. So maybe if we blend those, we call that the convolutionary approach. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but the choice should be really based on an honest appraisal of who you are, where you are, and where you want to go. I could pause right here. Does anybody have a question or comment? I'm kind of bulldozing through this and I don't want to cut anybody out. Any comments or questions so far? Don't hear anything. Okay, well, just jump right in. If you do, feel free to give me your thoughts and inputs. That's the best way as we go along. So I mentioned this when we did the introductions and I was talking to you. I kind of come from the old social work background of evidence-based practice. And that's actually one of the reasons I started the program at the university. I believe in passion, but honestly, I think passion has to be coupled with professionalism. You know, professionalism is going to help us with our outcomes. So when it comes to forming a nonprofit and running a nonprofit and planning, everything has to be based on evidence. So as we go through the process, I encourage organizations to put together what I would call a data booklet of some kind. And it's used to inform everybody who's on the planning process. So again, it's based on facts. So if you're going to plan, you need to have information, and maybe not everybody on your planning team has the same level of information you do. So, do one for your organization that, and again, you might be surprised that you have board members that don't even know this information. All your programs, who you serve, the geographic scope of your programs, the demographics of those you serve, and then your service area, your priorities, some success stories, and then pull in data. How are the demographics of Des Moines changing? How are the people changing? How have the ages changed? And do you have new ethnicities and races? The education levels, and look at some of the well-being indicators like the free and reduced lunches, the poverty rates, the abuse and violence rates, the graduation rates. Anything that has a tentacle that reaches into your work should be understood as you do planning. And putting together a booklet like this actually is something you can use later. You can use it, in grant writing. You can use it in your case statements, anything like that. But I think this is a really good tool for organizations to have as you do any kind of planning. So just briefly, and I'm not going to get much into this, I just want to mention, because I think it's super important, as you do planning, always be looking at your mission statement. The key question you should be asking as a leader and as a board, are we still relevant? And your mission statement is one of the most key statements you have. So visit that frequently, at least every couple of years, to make sure your wording is right, that it accomplishes what you need it to. You don't have to say everything, but your mission statement is one of the first things that people who want to learn about your organization are going to read. And you want to make sure that it's right. If it's outdated, take time to change it. And then the vision statement, of course, that's important. And the vision statement is the end of the road. It should accurately reflect what you want the world to look like if everything in your program works. I find that a lot of organizations don't take time to visit and refine their vision statement. I did an analysis in Kansas City last year and found that fewer than 1/3 of all nonprofits listed their vision statement on their website. You should. That should be out there. Make sure your vision statement is updated, it accurately reflects what you're trying to do, and that you list it. And then I want to talk about your values just real briefly. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I know that many of you have gone through this process, but I can't emphasize enough how important values are. And I'm going to use the word belief statements because I actually prefer those over values. But what are the motives of the people who carry out your work? In other words, your staff, your board members, and it could even be your volunteers. What compels them to do what they do? So the values and the beliefs of your organization represent what motivates you. They represent the behaviors that drive you to do what you do. And these are the things that you would live by, regardless of what conditions you're in or where you are, day in and day out. These are the values. They explain more than your work. They explain the behaviors that your team will always use when carrying out work. And I mean, these are really important if you think about these. These guide your work. So I'll give you an example. Values are what you believe are the right things to do. Now, keep in mind, they apply to everyone. So I always warn boards when they form these to make sure, because if you have a value of respect and compassion, you can't be rude in board meetings. You have to always treat people with value and respect. And if you have a belief of treating others with kindness, you must be kind. If you have a statement that says you value openness of ideas and opinions, then your staff and your board meetings have to model this. So I think you get the idea. And I see a lot of organizations will go through this process and they just put in one word, respect, dignity, and whatever. But in truth, I want you to use these beliefs and values as part of your hiring process and part of your evaluation, annual evaluations, to say, we model these behaviors. And again, these are important, and I'm kind of zipping through this. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I want to just say this. Most of you make your daily decisions on your belief system. And think about this. Some of you will go out of your way to shop at certain businesses because you agree with their beliefs and their values. And then likewise, Some of you would never do business with certain organizations or companies because you don't agree with their belief statements. Well, this translates over to the nonprofit industry and charitable giving. People want to know what drives your organization to do what you do. What's your underlying motive? So that's going back to my earlier word on clarity. Your belief statements provide clarity on who you are and what drives you to do what you do. And those may not be the same as another organization who does something similar to yours. So when it comes time to choose who I support with my time or my money or who I partner with, I'm partnering with the one who shares my beliefs. Okay, I'm sort of getting worked up on that topic, but I'm passionate. And let's zip through this kind of now as we talk about the process. So this is what I call the discovery phase. To truly understand your organization, I want you to look at it from different angles, and this is the old SWOT, and I know many of you have used this. It's been around for many years, but it's still a real simple way to examine your organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's really a simple tool in the planning process to understand the environment where you operate and the impact, good or bad. So on the left side are the strengths and weaknesses, and these are things within your control that your organization can do. You have likely you have an opportunity to do something about it. And then on the right side, you're going to see the opportunities and threats. And these are things that may be outside of your control. These are things that may be an opportunity where you ought to be paying attention, something that you could grow from or benefit from. And then threats are those things that pose a potential threat. So examples of opportunities are like change or threats or changes in our political environment, in government policies, and also things like a lack of diverse funding that may be you're dependent on other people. You're dependent on an outside source. So to do these in the old days, we did focus groups. I would encourage you to do surveys or some kind and involve your board and your staff. And again, I'm kind of just going through this to set the stage, and I'm not going to go through line by line, but assuming many of you have been through the process, I just want to show the steps and the approach that we typically use. We start with those big ticket items, and then we work down through the priorities. And I would encourage organizations to set no more than 4 priorities. And then you're going to get into the objectives, what you want to accomplish under each one, your methods, your tactics, and describe the steps. And then if you have a goal of launching a new, say, drug rehab program, your activities are going to include all the steps to get that program launched. And then activities associate with things like property and building, funding, staffing, marketing, and so on. And then, of course, your timeline of implementation. One of the things that I would encourage you to do, whether it's long-term or short-term planning, is make sure at some point you put in a degree of change. How much do you want to expand? How many donors are you trying to gain? Without some degree of change, it's really impossible to know. It's impossible to monitor the program, honestly. In every aspect of your organization, your programs, your marketing, really needs some kind of benchmark that lets you know if you're on track. So set those indicators as reference points to evaluate your progress toward the goal. And if you're a funder, now think about this. If you're a funder and you have a choice between 2 nonprofits that do about the same thing, you're going to choose the one that is making the largest impact, the one that knows exactly what they're trying to accomplish and have measurable indicators to prove that they reach those. Oh, and there's, excuse me, there's just an example on the side of funding outcomes or marketing. And again, I think these probably ought to be populated by your leadership. The board's going to have a hard time knowing these. Maybe they can get you started on those, but these probably have to be completed by your team, probably not the board. I mean, maybe they could, but you need both. And then as you develop the plan with your goals, your methods, your outcomes, one of the ways that you can do real-time adjustments is to schedule regular check-ins. And I would really recommend looking at your calendar every 3 to 4 months to monitor your progress. And this is going to help keep you on track. And it also does something important. It reinforces accountability. So instead of going months and months not knowing if a project's on track or if your funding is on par, a timeline like this can help you get things moving forward. And if an adjustment is needed, you don't have to wait a full year to look up and then say, oh no, we're in dire straits here, because it may be too late at that point to make a pivot. And I want to throw up this, and again, we're going to get into some of the other stuff coming up, but the theory of change is a tool that I still find a lot of nonprofits don't use. This is a great tool, and it really should be part of every planning process. It's a visual representation of how your organization's programs and services work. It's a terrific tool for your staff, for your board, for your volunteers, and for your supporters and the broader community to quickly visualize the steps that you take and how it works from the beginning to the end. So as an example, if you were a reading program, you could say, if we had books and volunteers, then we could do a tutoring program. And if we did a tutoring program, then we could work inside schools with students at risk. And if we worked with at-risk students, it could improve their reading. If it improved their reading, it's going to improve their grades. You hear what I'm saying here. If it improved their grades, it's going to probably improve their behaviors, and so on. I mean, you can take that as long and far as you want, but if you do a visual representation like that, it's really a great benefit to everybody. And I think that this is something all organizations should have, a clear theory of change. So what's the difference? I mean, and this is not real scientific here. The long term is going to focus on the broader directions, the behaviors and interactions. And it's typically going to be 3 to 5 years, whereas the short term really is dealing more with right now, the here and now. Short-term planning could be in response to an emergency or, say, a global pandemic, but it could also be in response to an unpredictable environment, and it's going to focus more on how to get things done. It's more about the implementation of the process, not so much about the broader vision and the end of the road, so to speak, in the vision. It's about right now. So the way to do that, then, we're going to start with these short-term steps. And I mean, this is it right here. Start with the projects you're working on right now. In a quickly changing environment, really short steps can help you make the pivots you need and respond quickly. So let's, focusing on today, focusing on right now, the next 30 days, the next 60 days. What are the changes that we can make? And because there are so many unknown variables right now in our country, focus on what you do know. Instead of focusing on what you don't know, and we love to talk about what ifs, focus on what you do know right now. And what is it you have that can be altered? What can be changed? What can be put on hold? I know a lot of organizations had capital campaigns they were getting to do. Some of them plowed forward, and honestly, some of them have done pretty well. But I know some nonprofits have put those on hold because they don't feel like now is a good time. I really do believe, back to what we were saying earlier, this is not a bad time to do planning. But, as the world has changed, it's clear that multi-year plans are not going to be effective unless they're monitored and adjusted. So flexibility and responsiveness, I think, are the key right now. Now, this takes more work. It takes more check-in, but I think also that may be a good thing, that for some organizations, they simply weren't monitoring their plan. They weren't checking in frequently enough. And because of that, they would find themselves behind or veering from true north. So we just had the Super Bowl. Not that I'm happy about it, but I think this is a thing to consider, how short steps can help your organization. So Patrick Mahomes is good at this. So what happens in a huddle? They call a play, and then they line up, and then they can see what the defense is doing. And what happens? Well, what happens is the quarterback calls an audible, and he changes the plan right on the spot because he sees the need to pivot. So while your strategic plan is good, as a leader, you have to be willing to call audibles. You have to have the ability and the willingness to call an audible and make a change quickly. One of the ways that you can do this, and this is a powerful tool for decision making on calling an audible, and it's what I would call an opportunity matrix. Now, you also may be familiar with the term strategy screen. So tools like the SWOT are useful for looking at your current place, but organizations also need a tool that can help them analyze opportunities and strategies. It's really a common dilemma in long-range planning to not have flexibility for new opportunities. So if somebody walks in your door and they have this grand idea, but it doesn't fit with that new strategic plan, what are you going to do? Do you just outright reject it because you already have your goals and objectives and methods set, and this idea doesn't fit that? So an opportunity matrix is something that you can use to filter every new opportunity that comes your way. It's a tool that really can help you identify opportunities and measure them in light of your current programs and strategies. So you can see how it's broken down into different areas so you can see the opportunities. What we would typically do then is score every opportunity. Does it align with our mission? Does it support our current programs, or would it happen to actually detract from them? Do we have the people and the resources to actually carry this out? Do we have the capability? Does it fill an important gap? You don't want to do something that somebody in your market's already doing, but what if it's not being done or not being done adequately? Do we have the financial ability to do this, or could this actually generate new revenue? And is it sustainable? We don't want to start it if it's going to be around for 6 or 12 months and gone. And then another consideration is, how would the public feel about this? How would our current supporters feel about this? And I think if you use some kind of a matrix like this, you can really score opportunities. So in the coming weeks and months, organizations with plans, plans that are living documents that are nimble and flexible, reviewed often and used by your leadership team and your staff, are going to stand apart from those that are just trying to wing it and are on the fly. So you've heard me say this, but right now, yeah, absolutely. Should you be doing planning? You better believe it. You know, there's still a lot of uncertainty in our community. I mean, we've been through a lot, and the fear level may be lower now than it was in the spring, but there still are a lot of unknowns. We've been through the pandemic. We've had a shutdown. We've had an economic meltdown. We've been through social upheaval. We've been through a presidential election. And friends, there's still a lot of uncertainty. One of your tasks as a leader is to help to reassure your staff, your board, your supporters, the people who use your services. You must reassure them that your organization is here, that you're stable, that you're going to be around next week and next month and next year. So one of the ways you can do that is planning. So the logic behind scenario planning, I want to talk about scenario planning, and I'm going to borrow a page from crisis management because the two have a lot of similarities. A crisis occurs when an organization actually or seemingly has lost control of its operation, and the consequences have or appear to have negative outcomes for the people who care about your work. So the goal then is to take the steps to control the crisis, or at least to take charge of things within your control, and closely monitor the situation and make adjustments so that it changes that anxiety or uncertainty. So you do see how this resembles where you are right now? We live in this world of uncertainty where there's anxiety, there's fear, and your employees and the people you serve and your funders, all of them have this anxiety about the pandemic and what it means. So as a leader, you're really charged with helping bring things back under control. So the day-to-day work of your nonprofit is usually driven by concerns and urgent needs, like, people are hungry, people are homeless, there are injustices, funding has to be secured. And I know as a nonprofit, you're always pushed to produce measurable outcomes in the short term. Their planning horizons can be out of sight, and scenario planning then can look beyond immediate demands and peer far enough into the future to see these possibilities, asking what if. Scenario planning really is just about stories of things that could happen or may happen. And I think last year reminded us things rarely go as planned. So this is a way to sort of plan that. And I show you this. If you haven't done it, again, this is sort of how I would do it. This is a framework for what I call outside-in thinking. So the inner ring there refers to your organization or the cause that you address. The middle ring is the environment that you're operating in now, your community, the situation, the way things are, your consumers and your competitors. Oh, wait, I know we don't call other nonprofits competitors. Let's call them your co-opetition, how they're operating. And then the outer ring is the broader contextual environment, which has to do with all the outside forces, the behaviors, the politics, the governance, technology. So these two outer rings, the contextual and the working environment, they kind of blur into each other. But the distinction is helpful because it pushes you to consider not just the one factor, it makes you look at both. And then scenario planning gets you to thinking about these. How does it affect your organization? What are things that are going on now? And what can you do? So the goal then of the process, I think, is to help you accomplish your mission. And it helps you in your leadership during these times. So here's how we'll start it. And I would just kind of run through it to say that what are the drivers, number one? What are the things that are absolutely essential for you to accomplish your mission and the programs that you use to do that? And, so what are some essential components? Then you can see, you move from that to developing scenarios, and you move that to talking about what actions you would take if those occur. And then the triggers are when do you act? This is kind of a template that I would encourage you to use, where you break it down by your programs, your finances, your operations, and you can add other ones in there. But these are the uncertainties, like right now, if you look at the key drivers in your programs. So what's a key driver? Well, here's an example. If you're big brothers, big sisters, and you have a program that is dependent on volunteers to do the work, that's a driver. And then you would say, what is a vulnerability to our driver right now? Well, it would be guidelines and health restrictions or volunteers who don't want to interact publicly. You see what I'm saying? So then you would look, what's the importance level? Well, it's high. You absolutely need them. What's the risk level? I'd say right now it's pretty high. And you can work through each one of these different ones. What are the things to make your finances that you need? What are the absolute essentials? And then look to the next column and say, what are their importance level to our success, our mission success? And what's the risk level right now? So this is a good way to break through it, and don't overcomplicate this. Remember, clarity is more important than complexity right now. So take time to be clear about what matters most for every aspect, your operations, and this is a good exercise, even if we weren't in a pandemic, I think. So you need clarity for your board, your staff, your volunteers, your partnering agencies, your donors, and the people you serve. And then you're going to get into scenarios. So the scenarios, again, are going to be, what would you do? What are the scenarios that could occur? And then how would you respond to those scenarios? And that's going to get into the action steps. The action steps of, once you've determined your drivers and some possible scenarios, create this list of actions you would take. Doing this really can help you manage against every scenario. Well, no, you're not going to do every scenario, but it's going to protect you and help you maintain your work. The far left column is the category. that you would say, this is appropriate for any scenario, this is going to be for smaller ones, and this is for bigger ones? In other words, as an example, if you look at number 3, you may have to eliminate a certain program for a very large crisis of some kind. You may have to close some of your sites. You may have to reduce non-essential staff. But if you look at smaller scenarios and smaller crises, you may not have to eliminate people. You may have to cut salaries, or you may have to only eliminate a portion of benefits to your nonprofit or to your employees. So you see how each one has less drastic or more drastic steps as you go along. Okay, we're coming down to the end. Let's talk about contingency planning just a little bit. So scenario planning is made in anticipation of future events, where contingency planning is in response to a current or recent event or situation. Now, I recommend that you do both of these, really. It's the same approach. You're going to identify your internal and external risks in light of your current and planned programs and your projects. And then you're going to work through the what ifs as they relate to your funding, your staffing, and your ability to carry out those. And again, I'm happy to share any of these resources with you. And I don't think, when we first looked at the idea of short-term versus long-term, I really don't think it's one or the other. I really think whether you're doing what you call a long-range plan or you're doing short-term planning, it can actually be both. And a long-range plan, which today, I don't know what a long-range plan is. It used to be 2 or 3 years. Today, maybe 2 years is a long-range plan. But even if you, as an organization, develop a 2 or 3 year plan, you need to incorporate these different ways to monitor it. No one can accurately predict what the future is going to look like in 2 or 3 years. We know that. Not a one of us can predict how the new administration's policies and procedures will affect us. We all have hopes. We all have aspirations, but I don't think any of us truly know. And I don't think any of us really know what the economy is going to do. We don't know about the virus, the coronavirus. We don't know if the vaccinations are going to work. We don't know about the different new strains that are out there. There are many unanswered questions and a lot of variables that remain out there. But let me just say this as we get toward the end out here. The need for your programs and services is highly unlikely to change, at least get less or be reduced. If anything, it's going to continue to grow. And nonprofits are going to continue to be at the forefront of helping individuals and families recover from the pandemic. Government is great and they're helpful, but in truth, historically, if you look at the biggest crises that have impacted our nation, nonprofits have been at the forefront of the answer to every one of those. And I think we are still the answer today. I'm a believer and always have been that nonprofits are one of the keys to healthy communities. And I think we still are and will continue to be. So I encourage you to really get your board involved, to get your leadership involved, talking about these things. And, I've said it before and I'm going to say it again. Now is the time to be planning, whether that's 2 or 3 years or 12 months or whatever. But I really do think now is the time to be planning. Okay, I've talked long and hard for almost 53 minutes now, and I sort of apologize for that. But I would be happy to entertain any questions. And I'm going to stop share there and turn on my camera. Hey, so
Hi, Dan.
here's some reactions from everybody. What are your thoughts?
So hi, Dan. This is Claudia. First, I want to say thank you. A lot of good information. I have another meeting at 10, so I'm going to drop off soon. But last Saturday, I attended a training by Legal Aid of Iowa. I don't know if some board members did hear that it was just about board compliance. So would there be a possibility that maybe we can talk offline and set up something similar, more in depth,
On
where
compliance?
This training has a lot of information, and I wish like all my board members were here.
Mhm.
And not necessarily talk about a specific organization's planning, right? Like we're not gonna
All right.
do a contract for one, but just like more information. If this could be, shared maybe in a longer format.
Yeah, Claudia, I'd be happy to do that. I am really emphatic about the board's role in creating the longer term vision and setting the clear path. I think that could be one area that I think a lot of boards really miss it on.
Because there were a lot of places where I wanted to interject, but then you move into a really other important thing that it was fun to listen to. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. And then looking forward also to reading your report. I'm a data geek. Data analyst is my day job. So looking forward to that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I look forward to connecting with you. If you want to do a Zoom or something, just send me an invitation and I'd be happy to talk.
Awesome.
I'd be happy to. Let me just ask, you folks turn your camera on so I can see if you want. Hey, Nick, I like that picture behind you, by the way. Your backdrop's better than mine. How many of you, I'll wait as people turn their cameras on. How many of you have done strategic planning in the last, let's say since the pandemic started, any kind of planning, scenario planning, strategic planning, short-term planning? How many have done it? Brenda, Matt, Rachel. I didn't see some of the other hands, but did you incorporate any of these tools that we talked about?
I just love how you mentioned how important clarity is. I was the management member that represented on the strategic planning. And so I came back to my team a lot and talked to them about what it was, our focus was, where we'd be headed. And so I felt like all along my team knows that if it fits within these pots, that's what we're going for. And some of the other things, even traditional things that we used to do, it's not in those pots. And so maybe if there's time, we'll do some of it, but really we've got a defined focus. And that's been really nice during this time. And that's something that when I do my board report, I can share, with administration to share on to them how we're meeting those things. So clarity is huge, and just that top buy-in all the way down to make sure everybody on my team knows this is where we're headed. And
do you find that a lot of board members are really not that clear about even the program, how they're
so we have some high-level initiatives that we're working on, and I got to work with the board president on some things, and it was actually a great chance for me to really work with her in a way that I wouldn't normally have access to. But she would ask questions about, well, the library doesn't do this. And I'm like, oh, yes, we do. Here are all the examples of how we do this. But I love your idea and we'll do more of it.
And in reality, if your board president is not clear, it's like that ripple thing, and you guys, I'm sure some of you saw this, and I don't know how many nonprofits you have. I know Des Moines is quite a bit bigger than Springfield, but I did the Kansas City Nonprofit Impact Report. It's been almost a year ago. There are 12,569 registered nonprofits in the KC Metro. I bet Des Moines has probably 4,000 if you look at the metro. Does anybody know how many nonprofits you have registered? But you can just imagine the lack of clarity about your work, even though your name says something and you think, gee, we've been around 40, 50 years, everybody knows us. No, they don't. So, and I've even seen organizations that post their strategic plan or at least a summary on their website. I like that. I mean, maybe not the drilled down detailed version, but let people know we have a plan, we're moving forward.
We did a strategy on a page.
Pardon me?
The strategy on a page.
Well, maybe not it's a high level, our goals,
Yep.
our key priorities, and what we want to accomplish. Just
Yep.
simplify, maybe 2 pages, you know.
Yep.
Anyone else? I'd like to hear about your strategic planning or what you've been doing with your board over the past year.
This is Rachel. I'll say we're actually in the process of going through strategic planning right now. And it's one of those things that we had made that plan before the pandemic happened. And there was a lot of conversation. The board asked, you know, should we continue this process? And everybody was on the same page with, yeah, actually probably more than ever. It's probably more critical. And I think we're all really pleased that we're continuing to move forward in that process. And it kind of what you said, it really has been an opportunity for us to educate some of the board members. We have a fairly large board, and some of them don't know everything that we do. They know a lot of the basic things, like most of the community members know about big things we do, like Zubru or things like that that are well-known, Night Eyes. But there's a lot of programming that we do that not everyone necessarily knew was happening. They didn't necessarily know how advanced we are in our DEAI initiatives and things of that nature. So it's really been a good opportunity for us to get input from all sides. We've reached out to community members and partners to get their input as well. And it's invaluable. And I appreciate every bit of information you shared. You actually had some resources in there that I thought would be useful because they're not necessarily the same as some of the things that we've been using. So really helpful. I appreciate your time. It's a really useful conversation.
I'd like to actually ask all of you a question because I've done many plans in my life, but when March hit and they shut down travel, so I was probably like Nick and a lot of us from BKD did quite a bit of travel, you know, to cover our different sites. And then somebody said, oh, wait, don't come, but do it over Zoom. And I'm like, what? Kidding me? What about the synergy? What about the excitement of getting people in a room? So you guys that have done planning, how's that worked for you and what have you done?
For us, it's been a blend. I mean, we initially, some of us, you know, some of our process started before the pandemic hit. So we had already been doing, you know, focus groups and group conversations with teams and with the board and with our volunteer group and whatnot. But since the pandemic, a lot of that has had to change. So we have had to move to Zoom meetings. And that is kind of the mode right now as we move through this process. It's not the same, but it works.
Yeah.
You lose some of that dynamic of being in a room where you can, you know, use a whiteboard and write things up while you're talking. It's not quite that same, you know, connection point, I guess, but
yeah.
So it's definitely changed the process.
You know what I have found, and we can do it. We're doing it right now. But what I have found is, number one, it requires a lot more surveys. It requires a lot more time because what I do is like I'll develop the tasks. And then one of the keys for me on doing it via Zoom or virtually is I need a champion. So like I'll do surveys on the SWOT. I can do surveys on the strategic priorities. Once I get the strategic priorities, I need a champion for every priority. So I need a board member or I need somebody on your end who says, I will champion finance. I'll champion, you know, programs. And then that champion helps round everybody else up to bring in the results I need. And then we present it to the broader group. And so that's how it's worked. And it takes more time and more back and forth on, you know, I'm not sure what you meant, but we get it done. Yeah.
Well, I think our time's up, everybody. Dan, thank you so much. It was a great presentation, and I think it kind of brought us back to where maybe we need to be within our agencies itself. A lot of good reminders, but a lot of good the if and thens and everything that was included in it. It was good information. Trish, did you have anything that you wanted to say briefly before we go?
No, really just the last thing is I'll make sure that I get a follow-up email out to all of you on the nonprofit, the impact report. So I'll get that sent out, and I'll include Dan's contact information, Dan, if you would like me to, in case anybody has any questions on that. And then next month, just so that you know, it is a little bit earlier than normal. The nonprofit forum, it's on the 11th of March because we didn't want to run into that spring break time period.
Right.
You don't expect major travel this year, but you just never know. So we've got a great program on marketing tools and using your website for marketing. WebSpec is doing it. And if you're not familiar with WebSpec is an expert for websites for nonprofits. So you don't want to miss it. That's it.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks again, Dan, for
Yeah,
joining us.
thank you.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day. Bye.
You too.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Have a good one.